Hi, I'm here to introduce Holly Black, but I kind of want to become a cloistered nun now. That sounds kind of nice. One thing you should know about us in the library marketing department is that we are, as much as we are in the library marketing department, we also are kind of good at being stalkers of our authors. So when we saw Holly over the summer at an event in Bryant Park, I decided I really wanted her to come back and do something with us because I really enjoyed meeting her. So this is a professional way of stalking people, if you will. So Holly is the author of best-selling contemporary fantasy books for kids and teens. Some of her titles include the Spiderwick Chronicles, the Modern Fairy Tale series, the Good Neighbor graphic novel trilogy, the Curse Worker series, Doll Bones, and The Coldest Girl in Town. She has been a finalist for the Eisner Award and the recipient of the Andre Norton Award and a Newbery Honor. Currently, Holly, however, is writing a series with perhaps the darkest character of all, Lucifer, hopefully the darkest character of all, in her very first ever ongoing comic book series with DC Comics. And as a proud distribution partner of DC Comics, we are very honored that we now get to work with Holly's titles and very happy that she could be here today. Lastly, you should know that Holly also lives in Massachusetts. I'm not really sure what's happening. And we are very happy to have her. So, Holly Black.
Hi, yeah, I wasn't going to mention the Massachusetts thing. It's too weird. Hi, I'm gonna come to talk to you about the devil. So I've spent the last year writing 12 issues of a monthly comic series about Lucifer Morningstar, who in the DC Comics universe was actually created by Neil Gaiman. So according to DC, Neil Gaiman owns the devil. So Lucifer, the character, shows up for the first time in Sandman Preludes and Nocturnes, but he came into his own in a book called Season of the Mists. When he quit hell, he looked like Bowie. He was very, very Miltonian. And it came out in, I guess Season of the Mist came out as a graphic novel in 1992, so I was 20. And I was immediately of the Devil's Party, and I completely was aware of it. I was in. Sandman in general and Season of the Mist in particular were very formative for me as a writer. Growing up, I read a lot of like big fat fantasy novels, the kind where like a group of adventurers go on a really long walk to fight a Dark Lord. And I thought of myself as a fantasy reader, and though I was very young, as a fantasy writer. And my little sister was the horror reader, and there was like a firm line. And so it was Sandman who really showed me the power of mixing horror with fantasy in a contemporary setting. Gaiman constantly juxtaposed these brutal and visceral horror moments with these mythic, folkloric, numinous moments. And I remember reading Sandman for the first time in college and being so overwhelmed and freaked out by it that I forced my then boyfriend to read it while I watched him, because I was just trying to process it. I was like, no, keep reading, writing. I was an easily frightened kid. I grew up in New Jersey in a big old house that used to belong to my great-great-grandmother. My family was not big on religion, but we were very, very mystical. My mom did a lot of tarot cards, and she told us that the house was haunted. And then she used to play with the ghost of this little kid who she called Robbie in the attic. It's like a totally reasonable thing to tell a child, right? So, and whenever she would lose something in the house, she would accuse the ghost of having moved it. So she would walk around the house being like, Robbie, where are my keys? And there's no good outcome here. If she finds the keys, then the ghost gave them back, which means the ghost was right there, which is not good. And if she doesn't find the keys, then maybe the ghost is angry with us. My mom also, not to lay too much blame on her, but my mom also told me many frightening things. For example, she once told me never to astral project. I don't know if you know what astral projecting is. It is when you leave your body somehow, tethered by a silver cord, and go around like exploring the world while your body is still back in the house. And she told me never to astral project because if you leave your body, something else could get in it and possess you. I, who had not been planning on astral projecting, spent my entire childhood being like, stay in your body. They say that for a writer, a traumatic childhood is the gift that keeps on giving. I have a 3-year-old, so I try really hard to keep this in mind. But you can see why I avoided horror for a really long time, and also why I connected deeply with it, and why, for me, telling religious stories as folklore stories felt very doable. So anyway, after Sandman, there were a few spin-off series, and one of them was Mike Carey's Lucifer. He wrote 75 issues, and he took the character and the story in a different direction than Neil had. Carey's Lucifer wasn't content to drink cocktails and watch sunsets or run a piano bar, which is what was going on with Gaiman's Lucifer. He wanted to be free of his father's creation, and Carey, he did this neat trick in portraying the character where he would make you sympathize with him, and you would begin to identify with him, and you would begin to see him sort of as the hero of the story, and then he would make Lucifer do something so terrible that you were brought up short again and again, and you were reminded this person is not good. This person will not, whatever he is not good. And it was a great way to sort of tempt you, to highlight temptation by tempting you, the reader, to sort of forget who you were reading about. And Carey's Lucifer asked big questions about fate and about free will. And in the end, when it was over, Lucifer had left creation entirely. Everything had been neatly tied up. It was a masterful work based on Gaiman's, but very much its own thing. Really enjoyed it. So, meanwhile, in my normal life, I write kids' books, dark fantasy for young readers, and some kind of grittier dark fantasy for teenagers. So I was one day at home signing stacks of tip-in sheets for the first book of a middle grade series I was working on, and I got a phone call from Shelley Bond at Vertigo, and she said, "Remember when you pitched me a comic series and I turned it down?" And I said, "Yes, Shelley Bond, I do." "Thank you for reminding me." "Thank you for calling to remind me." And she said, "Well, do you want to do another one?" And at that point, I had 4 books still to write in the middle grade series. I had just started YA trilogy, and so I thought, there's no way I can do this. I absolutely did not have the time. And she said, "Or you could write for Lucifer." And I was like, "Oh, come on, I don't have time to do this." But, the devil is compelling. And so, even though I had no idea how I was going to fit into my schedule, I knew I had to write about this character that I had loved. So then I spent a while pitching ideas for what I might do. I knew, since Lucifer had a piano bar in LA at one time, and I wanted him to kind of come back and have some of that, I wanted to riff on sunlit noir. I thought I'll write some kind of mystery. And so I pitched idea after idea. And each one, she was like, maybe a little more here. And finally, I was like, maybe I didn't know what I was doing. Maybe I've got no idea. And so I wrote to her one line. I had written these nice pitches before, this time one line. And I was like, okay, God's dead and Lucifer has to solve the murder. And she was like, great. And I was like, this idea is demented. What are you talking about? And she was like, no, that's the one. So I got to talk to Neil Gaiman on the phone, and it was really nice, And he gave me this crazy idea, thumbs up, and he also told me the worst thing I've ever heard, which was to think of each issue as a tiny novel. He's like, it has that much story, like a novel, each issue, and I was like, no, oh, God. But he also told me to find I had to find my own way into the character. And, Gaiman's Lucifer's sort of a trickster figure, and Carey's is sort of a bastard-covered bastard in bastard sauce. And I hope that mine is somewhere between the two. Carey wanted to talk about Lucifer's journey in terms of growing up and leaving home And so I decided that what I wanted to do is tell the story about how, you know, when you come back home and you think you've changed and you think you're completely different, but then you get pulled back into the same old ways of being. You get to the same old rivalries, the same, the same self. You become the person you thought you left behind. As a prose writer, the hardest thing about writing comics is also the best thing about them, that you're so deeply in collaboration with the artist. Lee Garbett was amazing to work with. He added so much richness and texture to the world. But it's not easy to give up control. As a fiction writer, when I take characters into a forest, I get to set your expectations by the way I describe it, whether it's a friendly forest full of gambling animals ready to break into song, or whether it's sort of the deep, dark woods. Trusting an artist is to give up control, and yet, there's no way I could have told the story the way, that I did without an artist. There's no way I could describe something like The Market in Hell that Lee drew, which is frightening and beautiful and full of tiny kind of funny demons who clearly have stuff going on in the background. And art connects us immediately to story. You have to take the time to read, but just looking at a picture gives an immediate emotional response. And I had to think about story in a visual way. I'm used to burying clues to a mystery in these tiny moments. But in a comic, there needs to be a big visual moment for it to feel fair to the reader, to realize that there's an important clue there. It took me a while to sort of realize how to plot visually. And writing a comic also made me really aware of visual literacy. It turns out not everyone knows how to read comics. And so I had this group of readers who, and writers who I'd been working with for a long time, who we would send each other stories around. But, some of them actually didn't know how to read comics. They would look at the pictures separately from the words. They would read all the words on the page and then go back to look at the pictures, and they couldn't sort of sync them up. And while obviously Lucifer's not a kid's title, as a person who mostly writes for children, it was really interesting to me to realize that this genre, which is often kind of a controversial genre in terms of getting kids to read, actually not only was useful for reading, but taught a kind of reading that is very difficult to learn later in life. So anyway, after a year of writing Lucifer, I've thought a lot about the perennial fascination of the devil. His story is a dynastic story. It's about kings and princes and wars and thrones. And at the same time, it's a family story about brothers and fathers and sons. And yet, under all that, it's a mythic story. It's always also a mythic story. And I think we love him, if we love him, because he's a bad son, because he's ambitious, because he's a screw-up, because he's a rebel. He spits in the face of the establishment, the government, the rules, and he was the brightest angel before he fell. But maybe he was pushed a little bit. So it's been an honor to spend a year with the devil, and it's been an honor to spend the afternoon with you. Thank you.